But I think back then there was a lot more opportunity, and if you worked at it and persisted on trying to get the work, you could get it. I don't know if that's available now.
Okay, and Mr. Jordan, that seems to echo your testimony as well. That, I mean, I believe your comment was that post 2009, you're not seeing any of the contracts that you saw prior. That's true. How have you survived or navigated the time since 2009?
That is true, Assemblyman. How did I survive? I'm not sure that I survived, but I am here to an extent. I think that innovation has to be there. I think that a number of the cities did some different things. I think San Francisco went to a local business enterprise. I think Oakland did something like that. At one time, they were using zip codes to try to find firms in a certain area, like they could use a zip code for Chinatown, let's say, in Oakland, that would give priority, that would circumvent that. I think politically, one had to be more astute, and the organizations had to be more active. There were other kinds of things, like I sat on the Business Council, State Business Council for Caltrans, and we created what they call a UDBE, underutilized DBE. Now that's for federal contracts, and then we went about trying to find any contract that had $1 federal dollar, it would be federalized, and at that point in time, it could then have goals. I would say that business is politics and politics is business, and a lot of that had to come into play. That's what I say. And so there's just been a number of innovative ways to try to get around, like our joint venture quite a bit with major firms to tag on with them. And that has worked. But I would say, for the most part, the minority firms have disappeared.
And Mr. Lawrence, kind of following that, your report seems to indicate that the hardest hit after 2009, state of California, Oakland, San Francisco, and I'm assuming because they had programs to address minority-owned businesses at the time, those then were changed after Prop 209. Can you take us through that analysis?
Right. I think for the case of the state of California and the city of Oakland, the programs ended pretty much immediately. The state ended through the fiscal year June 30th of 1997, so it was about 7 months after Prop 209 that the state's program ended. And then I believe Oakland was about the same, and I think the state had an SBE program in place, but I don't know. What's sort of missing is a historical memory of what was done in those first few months to try to move MWBE firms into the SBE program. I really don't have that information. So I think eventually that's definitely happened, but I think it took some time for that, several years for a lot of those, and it definitely, the participation rate definitely was not the same as what it was, before Prop 209. So San Jose's program went till 2000, and so they continued. San Jose and San Francisco were two cities that continued their race-conscious programs after Prop 209, and both backed up with disparity studies saying that they were to address discrimination. And San Jose's ended in the year 2000 with the court case there, and then San Francisco in 2004 with Coral Construction case. So, that's actually pretty remarkable that San Francisco still had its program 7.5 years after Prop 209, and then it took a few years for it to get its local, as Mr. Jordan mentioned, its local business enterprise program going. But So that, and then the case of Los Angeles, like it had a race neutral, and they called it Minority, Women, and Other Business Enterprise Program, and so basically the white male business owners were the other business enterprise, and so they included everybody within the small business community, but they each were, they were all specified. And so its program really did not change under Prop 209. So it changed more with specific mayor administrations in Los Angeles have caused that to go up and down much more so than Prop 209 did. So.
Yeah, because of the I guess the political will at the time. And your report shows, in today's dollars, well over $1 billion in money that's lost to these organizations. And the data that you collect, DGS was here a little bit ago, and one of the things that they're saying is it's really hard to get data, and we've heard that from this panel. But you've done a pretty good job of collecting data and coming to some conclusions. How did you go about getting this underlying data?
Well, this is all historic. Most of this was all historic data before Prop 209, when there were much better data that was collected. And so, and anytime there's data in a report, it's going to be somewhere. It's either in a city or office or state office or a library. Somebody's going to have it. So just being persistent and finding it. But after Proposition 209, it was really very hard to find data that just for for the state, there's SBE data, but nothing else. So it's really hard to find good data. So.
Okay. Other questions from committee members, Mr. Jud.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I again want to thank the panelists for your description of a very bleak set of challenges that we are facing, which I think are summarized well in the conclusion of the Equal Justice Society's report. While California is a majority-minority state in terms of population, thanks to Prop 209, it's clearly a minority state with its public procurement dollars. I wanted to ask the same question to you that I asked of the first panel, and really trying to understand what you think state legislators ought to do, particularly those of us who believe that Prop 209 needs to be repealed, but knows that it's been 19 years and we need to deal with the reality of what we have. What I heard from Mr. Lorenz, you pointed to the Washington State Supplier Diversity Program. I heard from Mr. Selstrom earlier about potentially hardening an actual mandate. And then we had also heard from the state representative the idea of data collection. I just want to mention in San Francisco, we actually had requirements of data collection. It is legal. It's permissible under 209. It's partially how we've been able to know exactly how many dollars we have lost. And the fact that we have lost $200 million a year obviously has enormous implications for growing income inequality that we see in our city and around the state. But I wanted to ask for other panelists if you could tell us a legislative idea, proposal, something to fund that would really get at the heart of what you've all described. What would it be?
I would like to respond to that, Assemblyman Jud. My concept and being involved in the defense of affirmative action during Proposition 209, very intimately involved. I think that what the legislature could do today is to reintroduce the repeal of Proposition 209. I'm not sure all of my colleagues agree, but I think if you reintroduce that, it could bring out the deception that was involved during Proposition 209. The Los Angeles Times did a post poll, and it found that 27% of the voters thought they were voting for affirmative action, that the deception was there. Even in the description of the Civil Rights Act, it was so deceptive. And I think that if there was a reintroduction, the legislature can reintroduce it without going out collecting a lot of signatures and that kind of thing. And even if you fail, at least it brings the argument out. And it's just like then you come back and you say this is unjust. And I think as the public began to realize that it is unjust, and I think we can overcome because it is very bad now.
Assemblyman Chu, I would say that definitely a key thing would be to really institutionalize, to really incentivize unbundling. Because structurally then, because unbundling is across the board, basically. You could be a minority business, you could be a women-owned business, you could be small business and all. But being able to build that in to the state contract system, a unbundling requirement, just to promote diversity, job creation, certainly it would just open up the portals of access, say for firms that have downsized, firms that have started. In essence, it would really promote, say, access to opportunities that smaller firms just do not have now, of which we know many are minority and women-owned.
And one other thing is, we talk a lot about sort of the fairness reason for wanting and the sense of justice. I think the other side of this is the economic development argument. So I think we haven't talked quite enough about that. But in terms of what does that $1 billion mean in terms of economic development within minority communities, within households where women are business owners, and so. That economic development, I think, effect is something that I think the state could study more, like what it could do in terms, what type of economic engine that it could be to have more contracting with MBEs and WBEs. So.
Which translates into local contracting, which translates into local dollars as opposed to the big multinational companies getting all the money.
Okay. All right, Mr. Alejo and then Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you very much, and I certainly want to commend our chairman and our committee for holding this informational hearing, which in my view, is probably one of the most important informational hearings we'll have all year this session. I was calling for it a few weeks ago, that we should be asking these right questions, having this discussion right now, because this is certainly one of the most profound issues that will impact all Californians, where they're going to have economic prosperity. And all the discussion about income inequality means nothing if we can't be talking about these major procurement questions, our state agencies, our procurement process that doles out billions of dollars into our economy. And as legislators, we don't want to look back 5 or 10 years from now as we're rolling out major multi-billion-dollar bond, whether it's the water bond or the high-speed rail, and then look, where did the money go? And then to look like that a big part, we would see the data that said would show a big part of Californians didn't benefit from the recovery and those major projects. So I'm really glad we're having a discussion. Before I ask a question, I just want to let people know this is a really issue. Prop 209 was an issue that had a profound impact on my life, because when I was applying to law school after UC Berkeley, it's that fall of '97 was the first year it went into effect. When I was applying to get into law school, I was waitlisted at UCLA. I was waitlisted at Davis during a year where minorities in the UC law schools, for African Americans, the numbers dropped 80% from one year to the next. Latinos dropped 50% one to the next. Native Americans dropped 75% from one year to the next. And I was waitlisted. I was denied an opportunity. I had to wait a year. And again, I get waitlisted in '98, and I had to fight to get in to UC Davis School of Law. Fortunately, I graduated. Fortunately, I was one of those stories of people able to go back home and serve the rural communities, providing free legal services. So for me, this issue hits close to home. But the other part that's often not talked about of Prop 209 was not only university admissions or graduate and professional school admissions, but it was also the contracting. And here, I think we're talking about a lot of key points that we could be doing a better job of as legislators and as representatives of state agencies are here to hopefully do a better job in future years. But one key aspect of Mr. Lorenz's report also points out what was done even before Prop 209, where Governor P. Wilson signed Executive Order W-124-95, and the immediate impact that it had even before Prop 209 went into effect. So it seems that there's an executive piece that perhaps, I don't know if it's been unchanged, but I know there was differences when Governor Davis came in, but let's talk about even what could be done through executive order that might reverse what we saw happen even before Prop 209 passed. Any recommendations, Mr. Lawrence? Has any executive orders changed since 95 or so? If not, is that also an area that might help improve the procurement process for minority and women-owned businesses?
Yeah, I think especially the one in 95, there was a second one, an implementing one in 96 passed that was signed right after the election in 96. So both of those, I think, executive order could make a big difference. The 95 one is what actually impacted the Caltrans. It impacted Caltrans a lot more than Prop 209 did, because what it said was that the state would do no more than the minimum of what was required by the federal government. Well, the state Caltrans interpreted that to mean, with our DBE program, we will do the minimum required under the regs related to our DBE program. So immediately the DBE procurement or contracting went down by about 50%, and just overnight, with that executive order. So. Yeah.
Absolutely, and then maybe I'll just ask that when the Caltrans representatives come here, because as you point out in your report, Prop 209 did not have a direct impact on Caltrans DBE program, but it contributed to a climb where the low level of DBE contract became de facto acceptable. And I don't know if there's been any significant changes, or that's remained the same since then.
It's gotten worse.
It's gotten worse.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Gallagher.
I was going to add a comment.
Mr. Jordan?
Well, there was an executive order in 95, 96, and I forgot, by Governor Wilson. There was another executive order that had to do with the 25% for small business. And that was somewhere around 2004 or 5, out of the frustration of Proposition 209, and this executive order was implemented, and today small businesses in California get 25%. So I'm not sure of how the governor's executive order would impact the inclusion of minorities and women today, but it did do a great amount for small businesses. They do get 25%.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, it's a very important issue, because I think at the heart of what we're talking about is we want to ensure that we have opportunity for all throughout this state. But it occurred to me as I was listening to some of the testimony that I wonder if a big part of this is really a focus on small business in this state. Because I think I heard from each and every one of you that one of the problems is that small businesses end up being at a disadvantage in many of these in these contracts, because larger, more established firms can better navigate the different requirements in the state. And I think another big issue for us is California is a very tough place to do business. We have an ever-changing regulatory environment. We have some of the toughest taxation, some of the heaviest taxation, and then a lot of our small businesses have a hard time staying abreast of those changes in the regulatory environment, so they can be in a place where they can really compete. I've seen that with in my own district, where some of the rules that came out of their resources board, larger trucking firms were able to comply with those fairly easily. Smaller trucking firms, many of which are minority owned, had a harder time meeting some of those regulatory requirements. And so my question for you is, is this part of the problem, is that we have a very tough business climate for small business in the state? Because I think if we help grow and prosper our small businesses throughout the state, we'll also solve the issue, because many of these small businesses are minority owned, they're women owned businesses, if we solve the problem for small business throughout this state and make it easier to do business for small business to succeed in California, will we also help increase the opportunities for minorities and women-owned businesses?
I think that would definitely help. And to upgrade the classification of a small business, because in construction, a small business has to be much bigger than a small business that's a consultant, because consultant is pure labor. Construction, you're talking dollars, materials, dollars, labor, and it's a bigger company. And the thing we have to remember, too, is one requirement is that you have to be bondable in a lot of these projects. And if you're so small and you have nothing, you can't provide a bond, you're deemed a non-responsive bid, and they can throw you out. So you have to make it to where these small businesses can be defined as small businesses, like mine, for example, is not anymore, and then make the environment friendlier for small businesses and give them that competitive edge. I think if contractors had to use more small businesses, it would get more minorities and women into the contracting world, definitely. Which is, I think, the focus of the high-speed rail is a little bit more toward that small business focus.
If
Mr.
I
Ridley
may
Thomas.
respond to you,
Mr. Jordan?
I think there are two camps for that. Governor Schwarzenegger signed the small business executive order, and that was put up by the Minority Business Council, and I was part of the group that helped to develop that, along with some of the people here today. Small businesses now enjoy 25%, generally speaking, throughout the state. It did not really have an impact on minority and women businesses. And I've looked at the stats on that. Now, when you come to the high-speed rail, the $68 billion project, when we first entered that, and my group, APAC, I'm chair of that also, APAC, Associated Professionals and Contractors of California, when we first went in, and Orrin Selstrom with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and we asked for the papers, we found that $1 billion had been spent. It was only 7% small business and less than 1% minority and women-owned businesses combined, including DVBE. So over a period of 2 years, we worked, we did everything. We went to Congress, we tried to get, because the Federal Railroad Administration, unlike the Federal Transit Administration, FTA, did not have a mandate. They hadn't done anything since the Northeast Corridor high-speed rail. So they couldn't enforce anything on the federal side. So finally, Governor Brown appointed a gentleman named Dan Richard, and we put things together, and Lynn Shank, and a number of people came together. And so we did finally come up with 30% small business, and within that was 10% minority and 3% DVBE, and that's where it all came together, and that was helpful in that regard.
All right, Mr. Ridley Thomas.
Yes, it seems to me, based on being a representative of an area in Los Angeles, is the center of transportation infrastructure, 3 transit lines, a widening of a highway, and continuing programs with transportation infrastructure under construction that are part of the concern with Proposition 209 and its pervasive and deleterious impact is that we also, not just the firms that may be doing the work, or the generals or the high-level subs or the compliance folks, but the workforce itself that are working on those projects, particularly in those public works, large infrastructure projects, which in many ways, from what I observe in Los Angeles, are really driving economic growth in a real way. The private sector is not responding for various reasons in the way that the public sector is leading in my region, that we can't, when we have local hire goals, when we have various diversity and inclusion goals to try to hit federal standards, or use some of the methods that have been employed to avoid the harshness of Prop 209 on the state side, that we can't get those local hire goals fulfilled. And labor organizations may be a part of subsequent panels and are certainly a part of the conversation. But I don't know if any of you have responses to that, where be it a project in Chinatown and City College, or projects in Northern and Central California or in Southern California, we see that the inability to get the firms that will hire as a part of these contracts, bundled or unbundled and the like, or veteran businesses. I don't know if that's been mentioned much in this hearing. Also translating to the rank and file workforce, those folks who are really going to be the high wage earners that are going to drive economic growth, that are going to spend in their own communities. And that's an immediate concern, a pressing concern, and one that I think all Californians are interested in when they drive by a project in their communities. I don't know if you have any response to that, if any member of the panel might.
Well, I think you need to talk to labor unions. Because, for example, when I go to San Francisco, I can only take 4 people with me, and then I have to hire out of their hall. Well, when I hire out of their hall, in the past, sometimes I've gotten travelers that are coming from Arizona and Florida. And I'm like, and it annoys me because I'm like, I could be bringing my people, which, okay, they're East Bay, to work on this project, and yet I've got these travelers because I'm compelled to go to the hall in San Francisco and get people from them. So my hands are tied when I want to hire workers. And I know I have that local requirement. I'll have it on San Francisco jobs, Oakland jobs. Right now we're in BART and Contra Costa. Fortunately, most of my employees come from Contra Costa County, so that makes that easier. But I'm restricted by the unions as to what I can do. That's the electrical union. The laborers union, it's easier. I can work more with the laborers. But the electrical union is fairly archaic, and I'd like them to come out of the cave and join the real world, but I don't think that's going to happen unless they're forced to.
Well, I think that the question and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers and the laborers and several of the other building trades are very active as a part of it, but in their efforts, and this is my observation, in their efforts to try to meet those local hire goals, and they are significant parts of trying to make sure that we have local hire goals and that we invest in apprenticeship programs, which are public-private partnerships, that efforts like 209 have undermined the ability for firms to even partner with them. That's what I suspect. That's my notion. I'm a part of a demographic as a 27-year-old African-American male who might be competitive as a part of the workforce. But the inability of firms to get into the mix who are minority businesses, women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses appear to me, and I just anecdotal responses or quick responses with the chairman's indulgence, I welcome, to be holding that up or making that less likely. Because I think, in my observation, laborers are, the building trades writ large are attempting to honor the concerns of various communities, because these communities are putting up the tax dollars for these projects, are saying that they're going to pay off the debt associated with financing these projects. There's accountability all around, but it seems to me if you had more firms, that it would be easier, it would be a norm that we can hit the workforce goals if we had those who are leading the projects, public sector and private sector, that could embrace inclusion. Mr. Chan, Mr. Lorenz, Mr. George, if you have comments.
Yes, Assemblyman Thomas, Riley Thomas. Underlying a good part of this, too, is really access to capital on there. Because basically it does take money to really generate the jobs, to really meet, say, the apprenticeship journeyman requirements and all. And size does matter when it comes to access to capital and all. And so what we certainly have there, one thing certainly to open the doors would be to really look at the pre-qualifications to bid, particularly when they seem very unreasonable in terms of bonding, in terms of lines of credit, and other factors, because that's all part of opening. You can have the door open, but you also have to have the underlying access to capital or at reasonable levels to open those doors. Because if you got a project in Chinatown, yeah, I agree. The workforce should have been reflected, certainly, in the Chinatown campus and all. It didn't happen. A good part of that, too, was the pre-qualifications used as a screen. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.